All right, we'll talk about strike slips faults next. These are also known as wrench, transverse, or transform faults. The main feature is that the slip motion is moving roughly parallel to strike. So these were the first, the importance of these was first kind of realized at the time that plate tectonics was discovered. And if you look at the ocean floor, there's a pattern that tends to look like this. Okay, and it was noticed that earthquakes tend to occur kind of along. I'm drawing little X's where earthquakes happen in certain areas, but not in others. So we'll make a key here: earthquakes. And this is the mid-ocean ridge. And the plates, we now know at these places, are moving apart with this sort of sense. Okay, so there's these are the structures we're interested in here. These things that are parallel to the plate motion. And so ask yourself. So these are our transform faults or strike slip faults. Ask yourself, if you were at points A and B, when motion, if you could last a million years and observe, if you're at A and looking across at B, which direction would B move? Would B move to the left or to the right? Maybe pause the video and think about that for a second. Okay, so the answer is that B would move to the left. So we call this a left lateral fault. This is also known as sinistral. And the opposite of that, I'll just label it, is the right lateral fault, which has another name, dextral. And we'll see an example if you thought this was right lateral. We'll show you a little illustration of why it is left lateral. So basically left lateral, we use map symbols like this to indicate, and right lateral the opposite. So this is the fault kind of going off in either direction. So it doesn't matter. You can imagine yourself on either side. If you look at the other side, it moves either left or right, depending on which type of fault you're experiencing. Okay, so let's switch to a program called G-plates, where we can see one of these forming. This is the Earth at about 187 million years ago, a reconstruction, and anything that's gray is not part of the Earth's surface anymore. So we're watching the Atlantic Ocean open up as spreading occurs, and now spreading is occurring between Africa and South America. So let's look at these faults for a moment. I'm going to pause it, okay? So the orientation is a little bit different than we were just looking at, but here's here's one of these ridges. We can just zoom forward here. Motion is sort of parallel to these lines in the seafloor. And backing up, you can see if you're standing right about here looking across, on the other side it's moving to the right, okay? And so the motion, so there is no, oops, backing up to the beginning there. If you're far from the ridge, if you're over here, for example, there's no offset anymore. The offset only occurs between the ridge segments. So that's why the earthquakes occur either along the ridges or in these transform faults between them. And then these stripes that we see on the seafloor, like they're really clear up here, those are dead. They're not tectonically active anymore. So these areas are not going to have earthquakes. So this was a little bit counterintuitive to people that didn't understand seafloor spreading at the time. They looked at this and they thought, oh, there's a mountain range here, and then it's offset here. So this must have moved to the right to get there. But when you understand that the whole side, everything over here, this plate is moving away from that plate, then it makes sense. Okay, so this is just one example of a place where we see strike slip faults. Another important feature of strike slip faults here, if we draw that one, is they don't, so this would be like a map. So let's say north is up. This would be ask yourself, right or left lateral fault. So along this fault, oftentimes won't be perfectly straight along this right lateral fault. Maybe there'll be another curve up here, okay? So the whole thing is right lateral. And just to clarify, this is a map view. What happens at these places where it curves? So right here, if you can imagine it, we open up space. If you move this part, everything over here this way, and this that way, you're going to open up a hole, right? So we call what happens here. So in Earth, we don't get big giant holes because the things happen kind of too slowly for that. But we get faults. We get normal faults in this case. So this will be a place where we develop normal faults, and we call this, same thing here, we call this a releasing bend. And this is a place where it's a depression, so oftentimes there'll be water collected there. We call these sag ponds. And basins, these are places where sedimentary rocks will accumulate. And on the other hand, over here, the opposite, we have thrust faults forming as these two areas are kind of jammed together and there's not really room for all the stuff. So this we call a constraining bend. And if you look at a map of California, something like this, not very good, but the San Andreas Fault comes along. The west side of it is attached to the Pacific Plate. It's moving north, so it's a right lateral fault. There's a bend like this, a constraining bend, and there's big mountain ranges here. So This is Los Angeles, is right here, and the mountains around Los Angeles are San Gabriel Mountains, San Bernardino Mountains. They are Constraining Bend Mountains. They're there because of this bend in the fault. So these occur at all different scales, including this outcrop scale.